In a previous episode, we spoke about how IC works and how we can use it to quantify cleanliness in our electronic products. When all our IC data falls below our upper limits, generally that means that everything about our process is in order. Now, on a slight side note, that's not always the case. You should always question your data, whether or not it's telling you the story you want to hear. But I digress. What do we do, though, when we get results that exceed our limits? If you have issues with high IC data, stick around, because today we're going to be talking about the best practices in troubleshooting for getting the most accurate IC data possible. So imagine you're operating your manufacturing line and you send a routine sample for IC testing, and the results come back suggesting that you have an issue. Maybe one or more ions appear to be present at levels higher than the allowable limits that you've decided on for your process. So what do you do next? At this point, one or more of the following things have occurred. Either one, the IC data was not interpreted properly and the high values are wrong. Two, the IC data was interpreted correctly, but the samples were contaminated, giving a false reading. Or three, there are no issues with the IC and the high values are actually correct. The first thing that you should do is check the analysis of the data. Take a look at the raw chromatograms and make sure everything looks right. Here are a few things to look out for. First are baseline shifts. If you're not running a solvent gradient, the baseline should be completely flat. This includes things like periodic waves in the baseline that could indicate issues with the pump. Second, look for missing peaks or negative peaks. When you run standards, you should see all the peaks associated with the ions in the sample. If not, then the column has been compromised and needs fixing. Also, negative peaks where there aren't normally any could indicate an issue. Lastly, look for poor resolution. What I mean by this is that peaks that are normally separated appear to slightly overlap. This can cause issues with the algorithm that integrates the peaks. Once you've established that the chromatogram looks good, check on the calibration. You should be able to see how well the calibration curve fits the known standards that were run. It's recommended to run a set of calibration standards with each set of samples, as columns tend to shift slightly over time. You may need to adjust the calibration parameters if there's a large discrepancy between the data and the line. At this point, if everything looks good, there's probably not an issue with the system. This brings us to accidental contamination. For proper IC handling, here are a few tips. 1. Always wear clean gloves. You can easily contaminate a sample with your bare hands or with gloves that you've been wearing for a while. Second, use clean pipettes, extraction bags, and sample vials. Even if you purchase clean disposable products, there's always a chance that they were contaminated before they even got through your front door. To check, run a control sample with your extraction solvent that has touched all of these things. If you see peaks in this control sample, then you have a decision to make. You can either subtract those values from your samples if they're low enough, or if they're too high, then you're going to need to get clean replacements. And third, check your extraction solvent. It's possible that someone accidentally contaminated the extraction solvent during testing. You should always run a blank of just the solvent to ensure that it's clean. And lastly, handle the parts as little as possible. When transferring samples between the various stages of the testing, make sure to touch it as little as possible to avoid contamination. If you've done all of this, corrected any potential sources of contamination, and you still see high values, it's very likely that the numbers are real and that you have a contamination issue within your process. One good way to track down the source is to take extracts off of handling surfaces that touch the product, and to test all materials that may be present or that touch the board. For example, test all solvents, adhesives, tapes, fixtures, or coatings that come into contact with your board. After all is said and done, you should have a pretty good idea of where the ionic contamination is coming from in order to put into place measures to mitigate it. Alright, if you like that content, make sure to hit the like button. You can also hit that bell icon to be notified of future videos. Now, if you have any problems with IC or have any questions about issues, feel free to leave them in the comments below, or you can send an email to AskDrAdam@KYZEN.com. Thanks again, and stay clean.